You felt like you unlocked the universe. Everything made sense. The trees spoke in silence, the sky seemed alive, and for a moment, it felt like you were more than human. But now, nothing. No motivation, no ambition, just an endless sense of meh. What happened? Why do so many people feel profoundly alive during a spiritual awakening, only to find themselves utterly unmotivated afterward? Is it depression? Is it burnout? Or is something deeper at play here? Carl Jung, one of the founding fathers of depth psychology, believed that spiritual awakenings aren't gentle moments of peace, they are psychological earthquakes. The self, which Jung called the totality of the conscious and unconscious mind, suddenly reveals itself, and when it does, the ego, your former sense of I, gets humbled, even shattered. And this changes everything. This isn't a failure, it's the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole. But the path to wholeness is anything but glamorous. It's disorienting, because once the ego collapses, so do all the goals and motivations tied to it. Career ambitions, social status, material achievements, they often feel hollow after awakening. The drive to succeed fades, not because you're lazy, but because the identity that once clung to those desires is dissolving, and that leaves a void, a deep, echoing silence where noise used to be. Most people panic here. They chase the next spiritual high. They try to fix themselves, assume they've done something wrong. But Jung warned us, those who pursue light without confronting their own shadow risk being consumed by illusion. Real integration doesn't sparkle. It doesn't inspire Instagram quotes. It feels raw, empty, sometimes even meaningless. That's exactly where you might be. But this isn't the time to turn back. This is the threshold, the point where the real work begins. And if you dare to stay here, something extraordinary might emerge. Something honest, something sustainable. Because this video isn't just about the loss of motivation, it's about the rebirth of something more authentic. We'll explore what happens to the psyche after awakening, why motivation disappears, and how Jung's insights offer a path through the numbness. You're not broken, you're not lost, you're evolving. And this emptiness? It might just be the first sign that something real, something far deeper than ego, is waking up inside you. And in that stillness beyond the collapse, beyond the confusion, a deeper intelligence begins to stir. So, what exactly is a spiritual awakening? It's a term that's often thrown around online, usually dressed in ethereal imagery and vague inspiration. But a true spiritual awakening is anything but comfortable. It's a memento series of moments when your ordinary perception of reality fractures. The world stops being what it used to be. You see through the roles, the illusions, the surface-level meanings. Time may feel different. Emotions intensify, and a strange sense of unity and presence takes over. But this isn't just about blissful meditation or mystical experiences. Carl Jung described awakening as a confrontation with the self, the deeper, often hidden totality of your psyche. It's not just about seeing the light, it's about seeing your darkness too. The awakening pulls back the curtain on your unconscious, revealing both your deepest truths and your most uncomfortable contradictions. At first, it feels liberating. You're no longer just your name, your job, your past. You're more than your thoughts. You begin to feel connected to everything and detached from the ego structures that once defined you. But then reality sets in. Your old goals begin to dissolve. The world feels surreal. You start questioning everything, not just society, but yourself. Who are you now that your identity has unraveled? Why does everything that once felt important now seem trivial? What's left to strive for when your former self is no longer in charge? Jung believed that this crisis is not pathological. It's necessary. It marks the breaking open of the ego so that a more integrated self can emerge. It's the psyche's way of forcing you to meet the unknown within, even if that means sitting in silence with your own confusion. This is where many people feel lost, because the guideposts of the past are gone. Your former motivations, success, validation, approval, feel artificial. You're left in a space of inner reorganization, where the conscious and unconscious begin to communicate, often in confusing and symbolic ways. Spiritual awakening is not a finish line. It's the beginning of a deep, ongoing transformation, one that requires courage, patience, and radical honesty. And as we'll see in the next section, This transformation often triggers the very loss of motivation so many people experience not because something has gone wrong, but because something far deeper is waking up. People often expect awakening to be a linear climb toward peace and joy, but it rarely is. It's more like being dropped into an emotional wilderness without a map. There's confusion, grief, even terror. The ego, which once provided direction and meaning, is gone, at least disoriented. You begin to see through the societal scripts you followed, the job, the identity, the image, the plans. They no longer carry weight, and this loss of structure can feel like madness. Jung wrote extensively about the process of meeting the self as a kind of death-rebirth cycle. He likened it to the archetypal hero's journey. One must descend into the unconscious, face the dragon, integrate the shadow, and only then return with new wisdom. Awakening is just the call to adventure. The real journey begins when everything familiar collapses. It's also deeply personal. No two awakenings look the same. For some, it's triggered by trauma. For others, by meditation, psychedelics, or an inexplicable mystical experience. But what they share is this sudden rupture where the old identity no longer fits, and the new one has yet to form. In this gap, people may withdraw, relationships shift, careers are questioned. There's often a sense of being between worlds. And that's because you are. You're not the person you were before, but you haven't fully become who. So, why do so many people feel like they've lost all motivation after awakening? Why does that once fiery drive disappear overnight? The answer lies in understanding what truly fueled that motivation in the first place. Before awakening, our goals and ambitions are often rooted in the ego. We chase careers, relationships, and recognition because we believe they will complete us. They become survival strategies tools to protect a fragile identity. Success, achievement, status, they aren't just pursuits, they're armor. They give us the illusion of worth. But awakening dissolves the illusion that these things define who we are. The ego, once the driver of all effort, starts to fade, and with it, the motivations tied to it fade too. Carl Jung saw this collapse not as destruction, but as initiation. When you begin to shed the ego's illusions, you also shed the rewards it was chasing. That dead zone you feel isn't laziness, it's the space between identities. It's a liminal state, a threshold between who you were and who you're becoming. You're no longer the old self, but you're not yet the new one. And here's where it gets tricky. Our culture thrives on motivation, hustle, productivity, growth. So when that fire goes out, it feels like failure. But in truth, it's an invitation to examine what you were chasing and why. To confront the emptiness you've been running from, Jung's concept of individuation reveals that true motivation doesn't come from outside validation. It emerges from within, from alignment with your deeper, authentic self. And finding that alignment often requires a period of withdrawal, silence, and even apathy. You see, the ego is loud, but the self whispers. The period after awakening is like standing in a psychological wilderness. The map is gone. The compass doesn't work. Nothing external pulls you like it used to. You may feel numb, tired, directionless, but Jung would say, that's progress, because before the new self can emerge, the old motivations must die, and death symbolic, or notice, uncomfortable. It strips away certainty, leaving space for something new to root. So if you feel unmotivated, confused, or detached, you're not regressing, you're transitioning. You're clearing the soil so something deeper, truer, and far more sustainable can grow. This period can feel like an existential fog. You wake up in the morning with no clear goal. Activities that used to excite you now seem pointless. Even basic responsibilities might feel heavy. And because you once associated motivation with passion and purpose, this absence feels terrifying. You wonder, is something wrong with me? But this emptiness isn't the end of your path, it's the space where something new wants to emerge. In Jungian terms, this is the descent into the unconscious. It's part of the individuation journey, where the psyche is reorganizing itself around deeper truths. You're not becoming less, you're shedding layers that never truly belonged to you in the first place. It's like winter for the soul. The surface is barren, quiet, still, but beneath the silence, the roots are growing. The problem is, This inward stage doesn't look productive on the outside. It doesn't conform to societal norms of constant achievement, and so, people often misinterpret it as failure, depression, a breakdown. But from a Jungian lens, it's actually a breakthrough in slow motion. Think of it like this. If your entire life was built around external validation, and now your ego doesn't need it anymore, what remains? The answer isn't always clear. In fact, Jung said that the search for meaning must come from within. The self doesn't operate on deadlines or metrics. It moves in symbols, in feelings, in... After the ego collapses and motivation disappears, many expect clarity or peace to follow. But instead, what often comes next is chaos, internal resistance, confusion, emotional turbulence. This is where shadow work begins. Shadow work is the process of facing the parts of ourselves we've rejected, denied, or hidden, what Jung called the shadow. These are not just dark traits like anger or jealousy, but also repressed desires, wounds, and even talents. Everything we've locked away to survive in society and maintain an ego identity. After awakening, the unconscious floods to the surface. It doesn't ask for permission. Old traumas rise. Forgotten memories return. Emotional triggers intensify. Why? Because the psyche is demanding integration. Jung believed that real transformation only happens when we make the unconscious conscious. That means owning your shadow, facing your darkness. Not intellectually, but emotionally, viscerally. You have to feel the parts of yourself you've spent your whole life avoiding. This work is not glamorous. It's not Instagrammable. It's raw. Sometimes ugly. It can feel like a regression, like you're getting worse, not better. But it's actually a sign of psychological growth. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. Here's the paradox. The more spiritually awake you become, the more of your unconscious you're forced to confront. And that includes the parts of you that are lazy, selfish, afraid, controlling all the things you hoped awakening would erase. This creates deep inner conflict. One part of you craves light, love, and transcendence. The other part resents, fears, doubts, and they start to battle inside of you. You question if you're a fraud. You wonder if you've made any progress at all. Jung warned about this split. He called it spiritual inflation, when the ego tries to identify with the self and becomes possessed by light, denying the shadow entirely. This can lead to burnout, delusion, and deep isolation. Shadow work restores balance. It forces humility. It humbles the ego even further by showing you that awakening doesn't make you superhuman, it makes you more human. And that's where your true power begins. The more you integrate your shadow, the less fragmented you become. Motivation slowly returns, not as ambition, but as alignment, clarity, and wholeness. Shadow work often begins subtly. You might notice certain patterns keep repeating: self-sabotage, toxic relationships, unexplained emotional outbursts. These aren't accidents. They are signals from the unconscious, begging for attention, begging to be seen. Jung didn't believe the shadow was evil. He believed it was necessary. The shadow contains not only our primal instincts and hidden fears, but also immense creative energy. The parts of us we reject are often the very parts we need to become whole. The anger that hides your boundary, the sadness that holds your compassion, the selfishness that protects your autonomy. And when these disowned parts start to surface, it feels overwhelming. You may start to question everything. How can I be spiritual and still feel rage? How can I meditate daily and still feel envy, insecurity, and resentment? This tension between who we think we are and who we actually are becomes a crucible for transformation. The challenge is that modern spirituality often promotes bypassing. It encourages love and light, but rarely shadow and integration. Jung warned about this trap. He saw people becoming identified with their light, their higher self, while their darkness grew stronger in the background, unseen, untouched, dangerous. Real growth comes when you stop performing healing and start living it. When you stop trying to transcend your pain and, instead, sit with it, talk to it, ask it what it wants. This is the heart of shadow work. It's about meeting your monsters, not to destroy them, but to understand them, to find out what they protect, because underneath every shadow is a wound. And underneath every wound is a need for love, for expression, for safety. The more you bring these unconscious parts into the light, the more energy you reclaim. Energy that was once used to suppress, deny, and avoid now becomes available for life, for creativity, for purpose. Shadow work is not about fixing yourself, it's about uniting with yourself. It's not always pretty, but it's always powerful. And once you begin this integration, something changes. Your choices become more aligned, your energy returns. And motivation flows not from force, but from your full presence. In the next section, we'll explore how the illusion of spiritual enlightenment can keep us stuck, and why embracing your humanity is the most sacred act of all. This process isn't about perfection, it's about presence. When you stop hiding from yourself, you begin to feel whole again. Not because you've solved everything, but because you've stopped pretending that you're supposed to. You begin to see your flaws not as failures, but as features of a deeper design. Jung believed that every person must descend into. At some point on the spiritual path, a dangerous idea can take root: the belief that you've arrived. That awakening is the end goal, that enlightenment is a state of perfect peace, clarity, and detachment. But according to Carl Jung, this illusion is not just misleading, it's harmful. Jung warned that the ego can easily hijack spiritual insight. It takes the vast, mysterious encounter with the self and turns it into a new identity. I am awakened. I am enlightened. And just like that, the ego sneaks in through the back door, wearing a new mask. This is spiritual inflation, a term Jung used to describe what happens when the ego tries to equate itself with the divine. It's a psychological defense, a way to avoid deeper work by clinging to a sense of superiority, purity, or spiritual status. The illusion of enlightenment can be seductive. It explains why you feel detached, why you no longer care about worldly things, but in many cases, this detachment isn't wisdom, it's avoidance. It's dissociation dressed up as transcendence. It's the ego cloaked in sacred language. Real enlightenment, if it exists at all, doesn't free you from your humanity. It roots you more deeply in it. Jung believed that integrating the self meant becoming fully human, not floating above your flaws, but embracing them consciously, with compassion, with honesty. The spiritual ego resists this. It doesn't want to admit that darkness still lives inside. It doesn't want to do shadow work. It wants light without friction, insight without effort, transcendence without transformation. But without integration, awakening becomes just another escape. This illusion is one of the main reasons people feel stuck after awakening. They believe they're supposed to feel bliss, purpose, higher vibration. When they don't, they assume something is wrong or worse, that they've fallen from grace. But Jung reminds us, there is no finish line, no permanent transcendence. Only deeper awareness, deeper wholeness, and more honest living. The path isn't it's inward. Awakening is not an escape from the world. It's an invitation to engage with it more authentically, from a place of truth. Jung emphasized that any spiritual insight, if not grounded in the psychological reality of the individual, becomes distorted. And this is precisely what happens when people cling to a static image of enlightenment. They think they've graduated, when really, they've just begun. What many call detachment is often disconnection. They stop feeling not because they've transcended pain, but because they've suppressed it. They lose interest in life not because they've found peace, but because they've numbed themselves from its messiness. This isn't higher consciousness, it's spiritual escapism. True spiritual growth integrates pain. It doesn't avoid it. It holds contradictions without needing to resolve them. It allows you to be both broken and whole, flawed and divine. Enlightenment isn't a mountain peak, it's a spiral. You return again and again to the same wounds, but with more grace each time. One of Jung's most powerful messages was this: wholeness is the goal, not perfection. And wholeness. So, how do you move forward when the old motivations have died and the illusion of enlightenment has crumbled? How do you reclaim purpose not from the ego, but from the self? Carl Jung believed that purpose isn't something you chase, it's something you uncover. It's not about striving for an identity. It's about listening to the quiet voice that arises when the ego finally stops shouting. After awakening, and after the emptiness, there comes a subtle stirring. Not ambition, not urgency, just a quiet sense of direction. You begin to sense where your energy wants to go. It's less about what should I do, and more about what feels honest, what feels real. True purpose arises from alignment, and alignment begins when you stop lying to yourself. You stop pretending to enjoy things you don't. You stop chasing things you no longer value. You start honoring your energy, your cycles, your truth even when it doesn't look impressive to others, even when it makes no sense to your former self. This is the slow return of authentic motivation. It doesn't roar in, it whispers, it invites, it comes without pressure, and it usually leads you not to the spotlight, but to the soul. Jung called this process individuation, the unfolding of the self from within. It's not about becoming something new, it's about remembering what you've always been, beneath the noise, beneath the masks. It's a pathless path, one that's different for everyone, and yet it's marked by the same signs: more honesty, less striving, more connection, less performance. You begin to live in accordance with your own inner compass, not society's expectations, not spiritual dogma, not your old ego desires. You begin to trust the stillness, the pauses, the spaces where nothing seems to happen, because you know now that's where everything begins. And paradoxically, it's in this surrendered state that motivation returns. Not the kind that burns you out, but the kind that sustains you, that grows slowly, like roots finding water. You begin to create, not to prove yourself, but to express what's true. You start serving others, not for validation, but because your cup is finally full enough to give. This is how purpose feels when it's born from the self, not the ego. You don't chase it, you become it. In this space, something remarkable begins to take shape. You realize that your actions no longer come from a need to be seen or admired, they come from alignment, from a sense of internal congruence, from moving in rhythm with your soul, not society. And this isn't just a poetic idea, it's practical. Purpose born from the self shows up in how you relate to people, how you work, how you create. It shows up in your patience, in your resilience, in your refusal to betray yourself, even when it's easier to do so. This stage can still feel confusing. The ego wants clarity, steps, and certainty. The self doesn't always offer that. What it gives instead is an inner compasser felt sense of rightness. You begin to notice what gives you life and what drains you. You start building from within. Jung described this state as a reunion with the inner truth that had been silenced by culture, trauma, or expectations. As you reconnect with it, something dormant within you activates. You begin to live from the inside out, and even though the external picture may still look uncertain, the internal experience is one of growing peace. You may start to engage with the world again, but this time, not to be validated, but to be of service, not to fix. So here we are, at the end of what might feel like a dark, confusing, and deeply personal journey. You started with a spiritual awakening that felt like a gift, a moment of clarity and connection. But what followed was unexpected: the loss of motivation, the death of identity, the rise of shadow. But here's the truth: this isn't the end, it's the beginning. Carl Jung taught that the path of individuation is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. And wholeness requires all of you, not just the light, but the darkness. Not just the clarity, but the confusion. It asks for your flaws, your fears, your forgotten dream sand, your deepest truths. You're not broken because you lost motivation. You're transforming. What you once called motivation may have been a survival strategy. What you now call emptiness might be space clearing for something real. For the first time, you're not chasing illusions, you're facing truth. You're meeting yourself, not the version others wanted, but the one who's always been waiting beneath the noise. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, it's incredibly disorienting. But it's also sacred. Because few people are willing to meet themselves at this depth. Few people walk through the fire and stay conscious. Jung believed that only by facing the unconscious, the shadow, the ego, the hidden drive scan, we ever become whole. And in that wholeness, a new kind of purpose emerges. Not the fire of ambition, but the glow of alignment, a quiet knowing, a sense of peace in action. So if you felt lost after awakening, if you've questioned your drive, your path, your passion owe this. You're not alone. And you're not failing. You're evolving. Losing motivation isn't a problem. It's a symptom of the deeper shift. The self is asking you to stop performing and start being. To let go of old identities and become the one who was always there, beneath it all. This is not the end of your path. It's the beginning of one that's real, honest, sustainable. The truth is, very few people talk about this stage. It's not as glamorous as the initial awakening. There are no fireworks here, no glowing third eyes, just silence. And yet, this silence contains a wisdom that no mantra, book, or teacher can give you. Because it's yours. You earned it through the unraveling, through the nights you didn't give up, through the quiet mornings when you chose to keep going, even when nothing made sense. That is real spiritual work. That is strength. And slowly, this work begins to pay off, not in applause, not in praise, but in presence. You begin to feel more at home in your own body. You reconnect with your intuition. You stop needing to be extraordinary, and instead find peace in being real. This is how transformation finishes what awakening started. It reclaims the parts of you that awakening shook loose. 2. If this video helped you see your journey more clearly, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Your support helps bring more conscious content to life.